Hey, I'm Byron Rhodes. Welcome to my art YouTube channel. Join me as I walk you through how I painted this. So, I apologize. I started the painting before I pushed the record button, so I hadn't painted much, just this background. But this painting is going to be a landscape painting I painted from imagination. I didn't use any any reference material, so no photos. Didn't look at anything, basically. Completely from my mind. The colors and everything completely from my mind. Just kind of having fun with paint, playing around with color. And when I got done with it, it kind of turned into, I don't know, I call it a desert stream because it kind of feels like shrub brush around the edges with a stream running through and kind of some mountains in the background, sunset. So now I'm painting this in acrylic, and basically all you need is just a jar with water in it, a washcloth to kind of dry out your brush, or kind of take some of the paint off your brush a little bit so you can do dry brush or whatever. And then you just need like a palette to put your paint on. Didn't even use any mediums. If you don't know what a medium is, it's just kind of it's something you add to your paint. It makes it dry a little slower, and it also gives it a little bit of transparency, and it helps your paint flow because the paint out of the tube is a little thicker. You add a little medium to it, it's a little more watery. But you can do that just by adding water too, by having a little more water on your paintbrush when you're painting. You can mix the water a little bit with your acrylic. So right here I started at the top just with some dark. I guess I should start by telling you what colors I used. I used titanium white, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cerulean blue, and alizarin crimson. I believe those are the only colors I used. I don't think I used cadmium yellow that much, so mostly the other four colors. But I did use it, I believe. I used it kind of to brighten up some areas. I started at the top, just kind of with the dark. I think I mixed alizarin crimson with the cerulean blue to make kind of a dark, deep purple. Probably had a little more blue in it than red, so it wasn't quite too purple. And I then kind of just faded that out, adding more blue. Then I did a little bit of a pinkish with the alizarin crimson and white, and then went into the yellow there at the bottom, kind of as a sunset. Usually with sunsets, I'm trying to be careful not to that transition from the blue to the reds to the yellow. I try to be careful not to go from blue to yellow, because then you get a greenish, and that might be fun sometimes to do a fun weird sky with green, but usually in reality you don't really see the yellow and the blue mixing to make a sunset. Usually there's kind of that pinkish rosy that reddish color in between the blues and the yellows of your sunset. So that's the background, and right now I'm laying in the foreground, midground and foreground. Just kind of laying down a little bit more reddish browns, yellowish browns. You can do that by kind of mixing the yellow ochre with, you kind of mix it with, what do you mix it with? Can't think. You mix the yellow ochre, yellow, purple dulls the yellow, so just add a little blue and alizarin crimson into that yellow, and it'll make it a duller yellow, because purple with the yellow makes a dull brown color, and depending on how much purple you put in it, if it's more purple, it's more on the red side. If you have more yellow than purple, it's more on the yellowish brown side. So you just kind of play with it until you get a color you like. And obviously if you have more yellow than purple, it's going to be a lighter brown. a lighter and yellower brown. But you add the blue and the crimson to make the purple, and then add that to your yellow ochre. And then that bottom color is basically alizarin crimson with the blue, because it's a little purpley, but it's got a little yellow. It's basically less yellow, and you're getting that kind of darker brown at the bottom. It's kind of a purpley brown. But things in the foreground are going to be darker and sharper images. So now I'm just playing around with shapes of my little hillsides, and I kind of create this kind of U or V shape kind of little valley or gully or gulch, whatever you want to call it. And the brushes I use are pretty cheap brushes. I just buy these cheap, 5 brush sets or whatever. This brand is the one I'm using now. Let's see. I think it's a Loew-Cornell. But they're pretty cheap brushes. You can buy a set of them. And I just have a ton of cheap brushes. I have a few really nice brushes. But I tend to just destroy my brushes. I get the paint up too high on the I think it's called the ferrule, where the metal wraps around the hair. I get my paint up there too high, and it gets way into the bristles, and so far you can't really clean it out. And eventually, just over time, like barely, just the residual paint and water or watered down paint gets up in those hairs and accumulates over time, and eventually just splits the hairs of the brush until you can't really get a nice flowing stroke. But sometimes it's kind of fun to play around with brushes that are all split and crazy like that. You could do some fun dry brush stuff with that. And I'm still just kind of playing around with shape and just seeing what comes out. If I see a cool shape, I'll kind of use that and define it as a rock or an outcropping or something. Being real loose. This is just a sketch, just having fun. I haven't painted in a while, so it's nice to get back into it and just not be too hard on myself on how it looks or how well I'm doing. And that's kind of why I didn't use any reference. I'm not trying to make it look like anything. I'm just having fun. And I'm hoping by kind of walking through this with you, it'll encourage you to kind of play around. And here I'm kind of just spattering, just playing around. I did this with my 4-year-old boys with their watercolor paints the other day. I'm like, I never use this technique. So I'm just like, I'll just try and play around with it and spatter some texture around. By the end of the painting, I don't think it really showed because I painted over it again. So I don't think much of it showed. But it's kind of fun just to try it. And you can do that technique just by, you basically just kind of do a watered down paint. You water down your paints basically and just flick it with your finger. Pretty simple. Here I'm using kind of a light gray purple. I'm just trying to bring some highlights out. I don't know if this ends up being the water, but I think I kind of do this and I go, oh, that kind of looks like a water or a river kind of flowing through this gulch. So I kind of just decided that's what it was going to be. I think I was originally just trying to make, texture on the ground. But that's originally kind of what I was thinking it was going to be. Just trying to create some variety of value in here. so that some of the ground pops out and some of it recedes. It's kind of a push and a pull of some of those textures in the foreground. Maybe I'm just trying to find some shapes for like larger rocks or parts of the hillside. I'm painting on a Strathmore. I think they call it a moleskin sketchpad. I really like them. It's really thick. You can do a lot of wet medium in them. You can do watercolor, acrylic. You can basically do anything you want in these sketch pads. They have quite a bit of tooth, so if you're using like graphite, it's going to grab a lot of that graphite off of your pencil, and it could smear a lot. But I mean, that's pretty typical of graphite, but it does have a little bit of tooth on it. So it's the Strathmore Art Journal, soft cover. It does have kind of a leathery, felty feeling on the cover. Mixed media paper, 64 pages. It's 7 3/4 by 9 3/4 inch. It's 90-pound paper. .500 series. I don't even know what that means, but I really like the feel of the paper, feel of the book itself. Feels really classy. But they're nice. They're nice little sketch pads. I'm making my way through this one. This is on this pretty much the last page of the sketchbook. But I'm actually making my way through, well, it's the second to last page, but I'm actually trying to work my way back through this sketchbook to start sketching on the backs of pages. Here I'm just trying to add some highlight to the edge of the hill. And again, just trying to search out some shape of the hillside, rocks and bushes, and just trying to find add some variation, make some unique shapes, vary the color, vary the value. I'm not trying to get too specific with defining anything. Just trying to make it interesting to look at as just like as if you took a little square viewfinder and laid it over the top of that hill. Would it be an interesting abstract piece? Would it have neat texture and color and variety? Here I'm deciding to make those two little bumps in the middle kind of like a distant mountain. And I'm going to go ahead and separate that from the other two hills embankments on the left and the right. So I'm making it kind of a duller color, and I'm going to try to lighten it up a little bit too, I believe. There we go. And so that, the farther things are away from you, the lighter they will be, and the less saturated, meaning it's going to have less color in it, less pure color. And here I'm just trying to define the edge of the hill. It's going to be more of like I don't know it's not really a canyon, but it is kind of like a washed out gully, that's kind of like the edge of the wash there. So it's kind of a little steeper. Trying to make it a little darker because the bushes and the brush that are on top of that are going to kind of, cast a little shadow. It's not going to get as much light as the brush on top. And I guess I should have said this at the beginning of my video, but not only did I forget to press the record button at the beginning, but I also ran out of battery life on my camera at the end. So there's about it's about 5.5 minutes left on this video, and it does not get all the way to the end, but I will post at the end of the video. You will see the finished product, and it got pretty close. You will just miss the kind of the finishing highlights and touch-ups at the very end of the process. Here again, I'm just trying to create more texture in the hillside, trying to make it a interesting foliage, just trying to make it visually interesting. This is a very unrefined painting. I'm really not trying to be careful at all, basically. Just trying to have fun. Kind of got to have that attitude when you haven't painted in a while and trying to get back into it. It will make your life easier if you don't, you don't want to be too hard on yourself. Art is about just having fun. It's easy to stress yourself out. I can do that. Especially when you draw something you really love and you tell yourself, I am going to paint this. And then you paint it and you're just stressing out because you want it to look just as good as your drawing. And when it's not turning out the way you want it, it can be super frustrating. That's partly why it's a good idea just to kind of do these loose, fun paintings just from imagination sometimes. Just to play around with the color, you might come up with something that's really interesting. Might come up with a new technique, or come up with a kind of a new range of colors that you haven't played around with. Like browns and grays for me. I don't often paint in browns and grays. It's not where I go first. I usually oversaturate my colors. But it's just a good idea to play around with colors sometimes with no expectations. Here I'm just trying to define the edge of those mountains. I'm trying to lighten up that sunset, that yellow a little bit, so it's not quite as bright, I suppose, for lack of a better word. So it's got that little bit of misty, atmospheric quality to it. The mountains at this point are way too symmetrical. And I'm speaking of the mountains in the background. They're like one triangle and another triangle, the same height and the same size. So by the end, and I mean, I don't know if you'll see this in this video, but I do edit that a little bit, and I kind of vary the top edge of that hillside, those two mountain peaks. I vary them much more to just to add variety. If something's in nature, most things in nature aren't completely symmetrical like that. Like as far as like geology is concerned, I suppose. Some things like flowers and whatnot can be pretty symmetrical, but I mean, just kind of the randomness of hills and mountains, they don't usually tend to be totally symmetrical. But anyway, I do vary that by the end. Then I also I do go back and add a little more saturation to that sunset, because right now you can see it's kind of pale right where I painted in the middle of those two mountains. It's kind of a pale, beigey. And I actually go back and I paint it more of that yellow. Not quite that saturated, but a little bit of a lighter yellow, but more consistent across that whole horizon right there. between those two embankments. Right here I'm just trying to add like a darker value in there to kind of push it a little more. The dark colors will push into your painting. So like underneath that brush, the edge of that brush, that casts a shadow kind of down. Or even if it's not like a direct cast shadow, it is getting less light underneath that brush than above it. So I'm trying to throw that kind of darker value in there. So again, I apologize for not having the full video. I'll try to correct that next time and figure that, kind of troubleshoot that out. But here's the finished image. I kind of added a little more, I kind of added some highlights in that gorge in the bottom as kind of a river, and I also added some highlights to some rocks on the left and the right side of the embankment to kind of create more depth and more interest in the image. But you know, I noticed there's some things I could have done better. Like the embankment on the left side needs some shadow underneath that brush. Didn't even see that until just now. But you know, you're always going to see things in your paintings later. And this is just a sketch, little quick thing, so it's no big deal. It's fun to look at. It has fun colors, fun textures. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it for the first painting I've done in months. And I like the colors. It was fun just to play around with them. So thanks again for watching this, if you got all the way through. And I'll see you the next time I record a drawing or painting.